We've just had our first qualifying session of 2024 for the Bahrain Grand Prix. Let's analyse what happened from the back of the grid to the front, starting of course with Alpine. So Alpine of course unfortunately qualified at the back of the grid today. How do you think they'll be feeling after that?
Yeah, I think they're going to be absolutely gutted with where they've both started. I think they'd be expecting it after testing, but obviously no team want to be right at the back. It's not ideal for anybody, and I think they both know that they've got a long journey ahead of them this season. Yeah, it's not looking great for them.
No, I thought it was nice though that Ocon came on the radio after he got knocked out in Q1. He's P19 tomorrow. And he gave a little message of encouragement and showed a bit of a leadership side to him, saying that, you know, we're all in this together. We know it's going to be tough for the first few races. You know, they've overhauled their entire car concept and they're getting used to that already. So it's going to take them a few races, I think, to adjust, and they won't be happy with where they are now. But I think maybe they're hopeful that it will get better in the future, at least at this point after the first quali session.
Yeah, I think a little message of encouragement is vital, especially at this point in the season. At the very, very start, all the mechanics, the whole team are going to be feeling down that, you know, they're right at the back of the grid. We saw the same with Hamilton when Mercedes was struggling. He was very motivational, and I think that'll just help to carry them through what's going to be a tough weekend. I think they're going to try and salvage the race tomorrow by using it as a bit of an extra testing session. They were working on the car in Parc Ferme, which means that they're going to have to take a pit lane start penalty. But obviously, if you're starting P19 and P20 with not really much pace to catch up to anybody, it doesn't really matter. I suppose they can test out a few new setup things and hopefully sort themselves out a little bit before Saudi Arabia. But even then, I think they're starting on the back foot. It's not going to be easy for them. So I think this whole start of the season is a little bit of a write-off for them. But hopefully they can make some steps forward.
Yeah, definitely. I think, you know, the Alpine are 10th at the moment for race pace. They're not too far off the Kick Saubers, so they could potentially battle with them. They qualified slightly higher. But I think, yeah, as you said, I think taking a pit lane start is probably the right choice for them and just trying to understand this car a bit more to benefit them in the future.
I think it wasn't really helped as well. Pierre had a disaster outlap, so that's obviously exaggerated where he would place. Maybe he'd be able to be, you know, P18 had somebody else had a bit of a bad day. But it's a bit of a disappointment for Alpine because they finished 6th last year and 4th in 2022. So they're just continuing to drop down in the constructor standings. Their development was looking really, really strong in 2022 until the sort of inner politics began within the team. Otmar leaving, Bruno Famin coming in as the interim team leader. And I think that's really what's thrown them off a little bit. They were on quite a clear path. And obviously it's not going great for them at the moment. So hopefully they can sort themselves out.
Yeah, I think a team with the exact opposite things happening internally is Williams. They're on a bit of a recovery turn in their leadership with James Vowles. But today was slightly disappointing for Logan Sargent. He's going to be P18 on the grid tomorrow. How did it go for him out there? How do you think he'll be feeling today?
Yeah, I think Sargent was looking quite confident throughout the whole weekend. He was complaining a little bit about traffic during Q1. But their race pace is looking quite strong. I think they're 6th for race pace. Alex Albon will be starting P13. So there's definitely a potential for Williams to be in the points, which is what James Vowles is aiming for. So I think as long as they do that, they can walk away from Bahrain quite happy.
Yeah, I agree. I think they've got to focus on the medium to long term, as we know. So this slight short-term setback there with Logan, yes, it's his second year in the sport. He needs to be doing slightly better than that for now. But I think for now, they won't be too worried about that. I think they'll be quite happy to just focus on improving the car and understanding this new car. I know we're only on the first race. I think we need to remember that, you know, these teams are only just getting used to these cars. Yeah. So I think they'll be bearing that in mind tonight. So a similar story to Alpine is Kick Sauber. Bottas has qualified in P16 with Zhou just behind him in P17. Zhou now has the most consecutive Q1 exits, and this won't be what the team is looking for, as they also, like Alpine, enter this new phase with their complete redesign of their car and their new technical director, James Key. How do you think they're looking on race pace tomorrow? Is this recoverable for them or no?
Yeah, that Zhou statistic is definitely not something a driver wants to hear about themselves. They're not looking great on race pace tomorrow. I think they're right at the back, so it's not looking too great for them. Something interesting actually was there was only a thousandth between Bottas and Zhou. So that could show that they're both pushing the car to the absolute limit, and that is what the car is capable of. But Zhou did have a dramatic slide at the last corner, which could contribute to that kind of drop in time. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how they go tomorrow with their race pace, because I think they will be back with the Alpines. So there might be a bit of a battle between them.
So while it was incredibly close between the Kick Saubers with just a thousandth separating them, it was a tale of two halves at Haas. With Magnussen out in Q2, he'll be 15th on the grid tomorrow, but Hülkenberg made it through to Q3. What happened there?
Yeah, Hulkenberg had a very impressive qualifying, and we're seeing this quite consistently from him. He's outperforming Magnussen in the qualifying sessions, and Magnussen doesn't really have anything to answer. He set a faster lap in Q2 than he did in Q3, potentially showing that he had some problems with traffic or a little slide or something in Q3. So he could even be starting tomorrow's race a little bit higher. It'll be interesting to see what happens in terms of race pace again. They're just above RB in 7th. So there could be a little bit of a fight there. But I think Haas are definitely starting off stronger than they thought they would be. Io Komatsu was almost admitting defeat at the start of the season, even prior to testing. So I think they'll be glad to see that they're, kind of in the back of the midfield in terms of race pace. What do you think will happen?
Yeah, I agree, to be honest. I think they'll probably end up battling with the RB. We've seen that Magnussen was very similar on pace through quali with Ricciardo and Tsunoda. So I think if that carries over to race pace, as the graphs and the race sims from FP2 under those representative conditions suggest, then I think we could have a bit of a fight between the Hasses. I'm not entirely sure that Nico Hulkenberg will stay 10th. I feel like a bit of racecraft may come into that, and whoever has the slightly faster race car and the better driving will obviously come out on top between those four drivers, the Haas and the RB, for that point. So we'll have to just see what happens there, I think.
Yeah, I think tomorrow will be an interesting litmus test for Haas. Obviously, last year, Nico was doing the same thing and starting off quite high and then dropping like a stone during the race because of the tyre degradation. So it'll be a good test for them tomorrow to see if he can maintain that position or, if he does drop down, if it's going to be as far as last year. But yeah, that's definitely going to be a good comparison to see how Haas are doing this year compared to last.
Interestingly, on their race sims from testing, Hulkenberg's degradation was very similar to that of the Alpine, I believe of Ocon. So we could see a bit of fighting there. Maybe he might fall back and hang around the Kick-Saubers and the Alpines if that degradation is as bad as it looks. Obviously, that was under perhaps non-representative conditions in testing when the sun was out in Bahrain. So we'll have to see what happens, I think. So though the media was saying that the RB car would be the next RB19, I'm not entirely sure we've seen that reflected today in how the Visa Cash App RBs qualified. They were both out in Q2, Tsunoda P11 and Ricciardo P14. How do you think they're feeling after that?
Yeah, it looks like a tale of two halves down at RB. Tsunoda was saying that he was quite happy with his performance, whereas Ricciardo's saying that he's not happy and a little bit disappointed, but looking forward to the race. Interestingly, Tsunoda was very, very close to getting into Q3. He was just 7 thousandths off Piastri. And so I don't think they should be too disappointed in that, especially considering where they were coming from last year. I know they made some good development towards the end of the year, but I think it's still been a significant jump now from where they were in Abu Dhabi to Bahrain. So yeah, they shouldn't be too displeased. Obviously, there was never going to be a miracle jump to be, P2 in the constructors. How do you think they're feeling?
I think they're probably feeling okay. I know Daniel said he was quite disappointed, but I looked at the graphs and compared Daniel and Yuki's runs to Max's, and interestingly, they're only about Max was only 400ths quicker than both of the drivers in Q1. So Q1 we saw that whole field was only separated by about a second, and it was so tight that I think today for the RBs it was just on a bit of a knife edge, and there was so little in it to getting through to the next round of qualifying that I think that's perhaps what tripped them up. Daniel also said that he was having some setup problems, I believe, in practice 3, and then narrowing that down into what he wanted to run for quali, and he was even making changes during quali to his setup. So that might have been what tripped him out. Looking at his throttle traces, there's a couple of dips heading out of a corner, which may suggest that he had a couple of little twitches and wasn't overly confident with where he was putting his car today, which is different to what we've seen in testing. He's looked very planted in the VCarb 01 through testing. So their race pace is looking stronger. He's looking stronger on race pace than Yuki. So we'll have to see what happens and whether they even out perhaps in their performance to sort of meet around the middle, and that could be points depending on what happens around them.
Yeah, I think maybe it could just be that little bit of wind that there was during the qualifying session, just throwing everybody off a little bit. But I think it's a good point you made of how close everything was throughout every qualifying session. I think between Max's pole time and Gasly in last, there was only just less than 2 seconds between them, which is very, very tight. So obviously we're going to have a very competitive season ahead of us.
I hope so. Yeah, it looks like it, doesn't it? So nothing massively remarkable out of Aston Martin, unlike this time last year. Stroll out in Q2, he was P12. After looking quite strong initially in the first phases of qualifying, he was putting in quite fast times, a lot of purple sectors, so I'm not entirely sure what happened there. Alonso we also saw running an alternate strategy. Can you explain what he did there?
Yeah, so he took his Q3 lap in sort of the gap between everybody doing their first lap and their second lap, which was a bit interesting because obviously the track was developing quite quickly. So I wonder if he could have had a better qualifying position had he done his with everybody else. I'm not really sure why he did that. Maybe that's something we can dive into the data about and have a look into that. But yeah, in terms of race pace, Aston Martin are looking like they're going to be around fifth, just below Mercedes, but above Williams. So hopefully it won't be too bad for them tomorrow.
Yes, you mentioned Mercedes. How do you think they're looking after today? Hamilton is down in P9. Russell is in the top 3 in P3. So how do you think they're feeling? How do you think they might do tomorrow?
I think Russell's got to be feeling great, to be honest. He's going into this season looking to take sort of a leadership role of the team just before Hamilton's departure. And starting third when your teammate's starting in P9 is definitely going to be the boost that he needs to give him that confidence to take the lead of the team. It was a very, very strong lap as well that put him in P3. So I think he's got to be happy. Hamilton's surely got to be a little bit disappointed. I saw in a post-quali interview that he was looking a little bit down about it. But obviously never bet against Hamilton. He always seems to turn it around on race day. So we'll have to see what he can do.
Yeah, definitely. I think Hamilton perhaps is feeling like Mercedes might be falling back into their old ways. I think that might be why he's feeling a little bit down, worried that the W15, although he feels is improved in its feel and the way he's sitting, he feels that it feels like a race car now. He may be slightly worried that they're going back to their old ways and just having some of those old feelings come up, I think. So we'll see how they recover it in race pace tomorrow. They're looking fairly strong there, but they were looking strongest, I believe, on their single lap pace versus their race pace. So if this is all they've got to give and P3 is their maximum, then that won't be a bad day in the office if they can hold on to that and get those points tomorrow. Okay, on to McLaren. So Lando is P7, Oscar in P8, less than a tenth separating both the drivers. They both got through into Q3. How do you think they went today, and how do you think they'll do tomorrow, more importantly?
I think they had decent qualifying. Obviously not the best, P7 and P8, but not too bad. I think tomorrow's when they're really going to perform. Their race pace is looking phenomenal. They're second fastest with quite a good gap to third, which is Ferrari. Another small problem is that Lando has taken his second of the 2 allocated energy stores and control electronics, which could lead to some potential penalties in the future. The reason I highlight this is this could be a potential issue with the Mercedes power unit in terms of reliability. And with such a long calendar, we could see this become a potential issue for other Mercedes-powered cars. What do you think of it?
So yeah, I am a little bit worried about this for Lando. I think the fact that they've taken an extra one now, to me, either suggests that they're confident that they've got enough other parts in the pool to sort of dip in and out of through the year. But the fact that this is their second of the 2 allocated parts probably suggests that there's a bit of a problem. So it'll be interesting to see whether this lasts the race tomorrow or if more problems arise, especially so in 2 or 3 races time, I think as well will be a key time potentially for some penalties if he has to take more than his allocation.
Yeah, and obviously taking parts outside of the allocation tends to be a grid drop. So if we see him having to receive grid drops more often, that could be devastating for his season.
It was incredibly strong qualifying for Ferrari. We've got Charles in P2 and Carlos in P4. Carlos, I think, will be slightly disappointed with that P4, but how do you think they're going to get on tomorrow? How's their race pace looking?
Yeah, they're third in race pace, so they should be up there. They should be able to maintain their positions. Maybe Carlos can get onto the podium. I was kind of expecting them to perform this well. I feel like they always do quite well in Bahrain. Obviously, Charles would have been wanting to fight maybe a little bit closer for pole. But yeah, I think they're looking strong and I think they'll have a good day tomorrow.
I think, interestingly, Charles' Q2 time would have been good enough for pole. So I think perhaps maybe he had a little bit of a problem in Q3 or was holding back in Q3, although I doubt that with how disappointed he looked in the Parc Fermé interviews and stuff. He didn't look massively happy with his P2. I think he felt he had it in the bag today to get pole. But as you say, their race pace is looking very strong. So it'll be interesting to see whether they can hang on to Max or whether Max, like last year, will just run off away from the rest of the field and leave perhaps the Ferraris just battling for the podium positions. We'll have to see. So finishing at the top spot, Max Verstappen, of course, claimed pole today, his 33rd career pole. How do you think he'll be feeling after that? And how do you think Sergio will be feeling at the fact that he was a little bit further off?
Yeah, obviously I think Max will be quite happy. He said it was a lot of fun qualifying. Obviously it was difficult with the wind and tricky to get the whole lap together. So I'm sure he's happy to be P1. Checo starting in P5. He wasn't too far behind Max. He was only 0.385 of a second behind. Obviously, P5, I think, seems a little bit harsh considering that gap, but with everything being so close, that's just the way it is.
Yeah, I'm not sure this will be the way Checo will want to start this incredibly key season for his career. Obviously, we know his seat is at risk for 2025. So he'll want to be improving from that tomorrow, and their race pace is looking incredibly strong, particularly also on his part. So I think he should be able to recover that tomorrow and hopefully start the season on a positive note. So just to finish off, who do you predict will be on the podium tomorrow?
So I'm thinking Max P1, I'm thinking Leclerc P2, and I'm thinking Perez P3. I think that Red Bull race pace will help him get from P5 up to that final podium spot. And obviously Charles and Ferrari are looking like they've got good race pace, so I think they'll be able to maintain their position.
Yeah, I agree with your top two. I think Max is probably going to be P1. I find it hard to believe that anyone could deny him of that, given his race pace and, of course, his quali pace that we saw today. I think Charles, as you said, will be in P2, but I'm going to go for Carlos in P3. I think his racecraft will probably help him overcome the slight race pace deficit he's got to the Red Bull, but that is as long as Ferrari don't make any strategy blunders, as we perhaps saw in 2023. Hopefully they've worked on that as well as the car over the winter. So that's qualifying analysed. We're heading into our first race of the season with the Bahrain Grand Prix, but who do you think will be on the podium? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, like this video if you enjoyed it, and of course subscribe to Apex for more deep dives into the F1 world.